There we go. All right. Whew, that could have been bad in 30 minutes. Says they sailed across to the country of the Gerasenes, which is opposite Galilee, when Jesus had stepped out on land, and there met him a man from the city who had demons. For a long time he had worn no clothes, and he had not lived in a house but among the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell down before him and said with a loud voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me." For he had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. For many a time it had seized him. He was kept under a guard and bound with chains and shackles, but he would break the bonds and be driven by the demon into the desert. Jesus then asked him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Legion," for many demons had entered him. And they begged him not to command them to depart into the abyss. Now a large herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him to let them enter these. So he gave them permission. Then the demons came out of the man and entered the pigs, and the herds rushed down the steep bank into the lake and drowned. When the herdsmen saw what had happened, they fled and told it in the city and in the country. Then people went out to see what had happened, and they came to Jesus and found the man from whom the demons had gone sitting at the feet of Jesus, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it told them how the demon-possessed man had been healed. Then all the people of the surrounding country of the Gerasenes asked him to depart from them, and they were seized with great fear. So he got into the boat and returned. The man from whom the demons had gone begged that he might be with him, but Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return to your home and declare how much God has done for you." And he went away proclaiming throughout the whole city how much Jesus had done for him. So it's a fascinating story. And first thing is, just don't separate the account on the sea where there's a storm and Jesus calms it, and don't separate that from the demon-possessed man. It's harder to hear. Hey, it's harder to hear because it's very clear that happens on the way to there. But for other stuff, it can be, like I always say, cross out the chapter headings if you need to. If it helps, you connect the stories. This is honestly connected to me to the parable of the sower, as we'll see also. But there's a lot of just important things there. And starting with, it says Jesus went to the other side. Well, it says as evening came, he went to the other side, which I find hilarious. But so it's getting dark, and it says go to the other side. And if you know what the other side means, you know that's insane. The problem with that for the Jewish kids, for the disciples, was what was on the other side. And it's kind of hard for us to imagine, because if you think, for example, Bryan and College Station aren't that much different, or even Houston and Dallas aren't that much different. I mean, even a random city in the United States compared to another city in the United States, in a sense, aren't that much different, because in the sense we're all the same worldview and understanding. It may vary from person to person, but there's probably no worldview difference that is greater than the west side of the Sea of Galilee versus the east. And I'm talking about contrasting the completely different worldview could not be any more different than the west side. On the west side is where the religious Jews were. That's where Capernaum, that's where Nazareth, that's where all the cities you see that Jesus visits. That is on the northwest corner of the Sea of Galilee. Galilee was that whole west side region. The east side to get over was the Decapolis. When you may see the Decapolis at some point in the text. But when it says he went to the other side, it's not just going to the other side and there's a bunch of Jews there too. No, he goes to the other side, and it's the Decapolis. It's the pagan region right across the sea, which if you go there, even it's mind-blowing that if you spend the morning in Capernaum and then you go to that day to Scythopolis, which is right across the sea, it's like it could not be any different. It's a mind-blowing to see what they value and how different they are. And you get to see where they had statues of the gods on the east side. On the west side, they had little bitty dusty old synagogues that were all the same size. And because you just see the difference in what they value. I mean, even just the roads on the west side, they didn't have roads because it wasn't useful. They didn't need that. But on the east side, the Greek Hellenist worldview, they did everything big. They did everything beautiful. They did everything for the gods. Everything was, you couldn't just have a building. You had to have the stone shipped from Egypt up the river and then carted 20 miles, a 3-ton stone just to be put there for one pillar. And then you went it all and did a second pillar. It's like they did everything big. It's amazing. Just the differences in the worldview. So what had happened on the east side of Galilee, basically in 337 BC, Alexander the Great came and conquered it. And then basically, in very short summary, he was a great missionary in a sense. He wanted to spread and plant the Hellenist worldview. He was very ethnocentric. He thought that the Greek Hellenist worldview, he was Roman, but they basically stole it from the Greeks. Roman just copied everything the Greeks did in a sense. But he wanted the Hellenist worldview throughout the whole world because they believed that was best and that was the greatest worldview. So he intended on spreading it. They figured, well, actually first, after the conquest, they had all these people in the military, these men, and didn't know what to do with them. So he gave them all giant plots of land over on the east side of the Sea of Galilee. They told the Jews, at least at first, you can keep your religion, you can worship your God, but we're going to be over here worshiping our gods. And just, eventually that spiraled out of control, as it always does. Same thing with the Greeks. They said, hey, we won't bother you. And then within 5 years, they were, skinning people alive if they circumcised their children. I mean, it always starts like that. But basically, they planted these cities on the east side of the Sea of Galilee there's 10 cities. That's where you get Decapolis, 10 cities. That's really all that means is 10 cities. By Jesus' time, there were 18 because they basically had church plants in a sense. One city, they got too big, they went and lived over here, and then eventually there were 18 big independent city-states on the east side of the Sea of Galilee. Alexander the Great's mission, and after him, his successor's mission, was to spread the Hellenist Roman worldview to the whole earth, at least the whole known earth at that time. And the way he believed you did this was by controlling 4 areas of the world, which are sports, control arts, control education, and control religion. Alexander the Great said, if I can have control of all 4 of those, then I can take over and control the world and spread the Hellenist worldview to everywhere. So because of that, they built theaters to control the arts. They built statues to control the media and entertainment. They put out mass marketed coins, which I'll talk about that later on, not now. When Jesus holds up a coin, I'll talk about that. Coins to them that was their mass media, because on the coins told you what you're supposed to think about your political leaders, which you didn't get to vote for in Rome, believe it or not. But their political leaders, would say stuff like, Nero says the divine and one Son of God, and Caesar's. And what's really important is Jesus holds up a coin. It says whose likeness. It drives me nuts. It says whose likeness and inscription is on it, and they say Caesar's. They answer the first question, but not the second, because that second question would dare not ever come off their lips, because it says, I believe it says Caesar, the divine one of the divine Father. So he's saying like the divine Son of the divine Father, Caesar's the divine Son of God. And they just say Caesar's. We're not going to say the second part. That would never come off our lips. To them, coins were the mass media propaganda of their day. So that's controlling the media. And then arenas. They built arenas for anything. I mean, the Greeks loved competing in games. And to control education, they built gymnasia, which to us means exercise. But to them, gymnasia is where you exercise your mind. It was schools. You would go to school at the gymnasia. And we eventually made it a sports thing, but to them that was just education. You would learn, and you could see even in stories from their time of these young Jewish boys and girls wrestling they started going in certain cities, not in Galilee, but they would start going to these gymnasia, and they learned very quickly, as one author put it, that they weren't just learning information, they were learning a worldview. They weren't just learning as much as the Greeks knew, they were learning how the Greeks lived, and they were learning the Greek worldview, and that tore Jewish families apart, because they would have a son or daughter go to a Greek gymnasia and learn, but they came back Greek, they became back Hellenized. So that was Alexander the Great's mission, and to control religion, he put up statues everywhere, the gods of it's amazing. There's statues of gods for everything. When Paul goes to Corinth, he wasn't kidding. He's like, you have a god of this and a god of that. Like, there's a god of sewage and a god of rain and a god of, the streets, because you want to make sure. And they had an unknown god just to check any boxes. They wanted to make sure, that's how you control and that, of course, was to push the idea that the emperor was God in flesh, which will come into play much later. But what Alexander the Great was trying to do was push this Hellenist worldview that he loved so much. And that Hellenist worldview, if I can summarize it very quickly, it's going to be important. It's going to sound very familiar too, but the Hellenist worldview is the biggest point of it is that the individual, the human man, is ultimate. What you want, you live for yourself. You live for yourself at the expense of others. You live for your own pleasure, for your own desire. You live for yourself. You are born to serve yourself. You're born to satisfy your pleasures and desires that the gods gave you. That was the number one core of Hellenism. Life was centered around those desires. That was vital. And that is, I mean, you can already see the opposite of the Jewish worldview, just the biblical worldview that we think we have a very similar worldview to the Jews, at least in a spiritual, theological sense, that life is not about yourself. You can't trust your desires. You can't trust your pleasures. You have to have them constantly shaped, constantly have your ears chiseled out, like we saw from Isaiah, constantly have your heart and mind shaped by the word, revealed will of God, because you can't trust yourself. You can't trust what you feel. And that was mind-blowing to the Greeks. That made absolutely no sense, that you would not just do what you feel like doing. Another one was that the ultimate source of truth is the human mind. If you can think of it, if you can understand it, then it must be true. If you can't comprehend it, if you can't understand it, it is not true. And that is, I mean, this maybe is already sounding more and more familiar as the world we live in, because in a sense we are Hellenized a lot. That is very contrast to the Jewish idea. The Jewish idea, I mean, just the biblical idea, really, but I mean, I'm speaking in first century terms. They didn't have the New Testament yet. It was the opposite. It was not that it was that if your mind couldn't comprehend it, then it must be something that God's mind could comprehend. And your mind can't comprehend God. God is way above. So they use so much metaphor and imagery, and the Psalms are all about how great and grandeur the God is, how great the God of the universe is. You don't want your mind to comprehend it. You can't. And the Greek mind was like, no, we can't comprehend it. Therefore, it must not be true. Another thing that played into that was relative truth. You determine truth for you, I determine it for me, because ultimate is our desires. If I desire to do one thing, if you desire to do another thing, you can do your desire, I do mine. And that was, to them, that was good, to feed and serve your own desires. Realize this is sounding more and more familiar. Lastly, the goal of Hellenism was to glorify oneself. It was to build up your own life at the expense of others, if need be. So they had a very rigid class system that we'll look at in a minute. And that was, I mean, just polar opposite of the Hebrew understanding of life, which was just right out of Genesis. It was called tikkun olam. It was repairing the world. Tikkun is repair, olam is world. The Jewish understanding was you tikkun olam, your life exists. That's why even now you can get, I heard one guy say you can get a baby announcement from someone and it says Dr. something Rosenstein. It's like they already called the baby a doctor because they know that one day he's going to grow up to be a doctor to help people, bring them out of chaos. And it's like, it's more of a, hopeful thing, but they realize the Hebrew understanding that your role in the world is to repair and bring peace in order to a broken world at your own. And in the point was to have joy. The Hellenist view was to pursue pleasure and happiness. The Jewish understanding, our understanding too, the biblical understanding is to pursue joy, which joy is the being in rhythm with God is joy. Whether you're being tortured or whether you're in difficulty, you can still be in rhythm with God and experience joy. And so giving yourself for the building up of others is to be in rhythm with God. And if that brings you not happiness, that's fine, because it brings you joy because you're in. And that was completely countercultural to the Hellenist understanding, which is fascinating because these people were across the lake. They were across the sea. You could see a few cities from at night when they had, lights on and the fire, not lights, but fire lit and whatever gave off light at their time. You could see that world from across the sea. And so when Jesus says a son went to a faraway country, he was not talking about he went off to Spain no, he's talking about the prodigal son went across the sea, in my opinion. It doesn't say that. It's a parable. And that's why, like I said last week, in parables, you don't name places or people unless it's very important. So Jesus, I'm sure, just on the Sea of Galilee said a son went to a faraway country. And it's not far away geographically, you can see it, but it's far away in worldview, in theology, in understanding. It was very far away. It could not be any more opposite. So although the Greeks viewed humans as ultimate, your mind and your beauty as ultimate, and your pleasure and satisfaction as ultimate, and that was how they worshipped the gods, was satisfying themselves. Although that is true, they had a very, very strict and rigid class system. You had, that's where you get the worst use of slaves in Paul's languages. It's not, don't think, early American slavery. It's not the same thing. It's a class of people that were the servant class. They still went home at the end of the day and saw their families. It's a lot different than the horrors of the early American foundation, but it's a class of bond servants. So a lot of people were freed from bond slavery and stayed in that because it was how you provided for yourself and your family. And a lot of people stayed in that. So there was a very rigid class system, 4 or 5 layers of just people, that were in charge, people that are lesser. Then soldiers were very honored, and then slaves were dead last. But although they valued humans, there was a very rigid class system, and how you basically moved up in this class system usually was determined by birth. But what caused that value, there's a few things, which was beauty and accomplishment and accumulation. So how beautiful you are. And beauty and good in Greek are the same word. It's the same, you use the same word, kalos, for beauty and good. So what is good is also beautiful, meaning pleasing to your eyes. Which is an interesting story about a lady in a garden talking to a snake that tries to get her and to look at the fruit instead of listening to God, and what was attractive to her eyes eventually caused her to sin. What you've accomplished is caused you to be more beautiful, more valued, and move up in the class rankings. And they valued athletes, and they valued politicians, and they valued celebrities who were acting and doing plays they did in the nude, by the way, and all the gymnasia stuff they did nude, everything they did nude, because the human image of your body was perfection. And that's why they often banned circumcision by the Jews, is because if the gods made your human body perfect and humanity is perfect the way we are, then why would you alter it in any way? You can't do that. And so they would, just later on, we wonder why the Jews wanted the Romans gone so bad. I mean, before Jesus showed up, there had already been many periods of time where the Roman soldiers would come by and disrobe your baby boy, and if he was circumcised, they'd beat him against the rocks and then kill your whole family. And we wonder why the zealots were, in my opinion, radicalized. I mean, it was years and years and years and years of their generations of families just being slaughtered by Romans that were just walking by. And of course, they were ready for war, and they did. So that was and of course, what gives you your value in the Hebrew understanding is called Tselem, image. So Jesus, whose Tselem is on this. And they all knew Caesar. Even though he's Caesar, he's in the image of God. So what gives me value, what gives her value, what gives all of you value is being in God's image. No matter what you contribute to the world, it does not matter, because from birth or from concept, whatever, I'm not going to get into that, but you are in the image of God. So that's why we just value, the Christians were known for just valuing slaves and valuing the unborn and valuing, there were this place on the east side of the Sea of Galilee. On the west side were the conservative religious Jews. On the east side of the Sea of Galilee, if you just didn't want a baby, you'd go throw it in the garbage. That's where Gehenna comes from. The image of Gehenna, you just go throw it in the trash heap where you put feces and you put trash and you just go throw them away because, yeah, because they did not contribute to your life and did not make you happy or satisfied. So you just got rid of them. And that's what I'm saying when Jesus says he goes to the other side, don't think like he goes to the city. It's not like the same as him going from Nazareth to Capernaum. He goes to he may as well have walked into Athens himself. Like, it is a completely different world. And so in that, because of that, we'll get to that. But because of that, the Jewish people at this time, you would not be caught dead over there, because you would not want you wouldn't want to go over there, but is detestable to God. And they wondered how such pagan and sinful and satanic practice got so close to God's people, and they kind of developed this understanding that we'll get into. But so another thing I want to get to first is, where did Jesus go? So he crosses he crosses the side of the Sea of Galilee to the east side, and in your Bible it either says the Gergesenes or the Gadarenes, or the Gerasenes. And to be honest, translators just cannot agree on what it's supposed to be. And the manuscripts are pretty much split, a third. They don't know what it's supposed to be. And I have an opinion about it's supposed to be, but it's based off a few things, so hear me out. I think it is important. I think it's interesting. There really were no cities right on the edge of the Sea of Galilee like Capernaum. In Capernaum, you could walk out of the synagogue and take 15 steps and be in the Sea of Galilee. It was right on the edge. That's a little exaggerated. It's more like 50 yards. But you could walk right there and be on the edge and be in the sea. The eastern side, they were more backed off a bit. They built these giant, massive cities. The only problem is they were really far away. So if you read the story, it doesn't make sense that either Gergesa or Gadar would be the city where the pig herders or Jesus went to, because what happens is they are freaked out, so they run all the way back, and they run all the way back to Jesus. And the problem is that Gerasa is 28 miles away. It's still on the east side of the Sea of Galilee. That whole big region was called the Decapolis. So it doesn't make sense to me that they'd run 28 miles, tell the town they'd run back 28 miles, and Jesus is still sitting there, it says, with the demon-possessed man at his feet learning, which is a Hebrew expression for sitting at the feet of the rabbis to learn. So it doesn't make sense to me that, and so the translators try to figure out, okay, I guess it's that, but that doesn't make sense because it's 28 miles. Also, you can't herd pigs 28 miles. Pigs are not sheep, pigs are not goats. You don't herd pigs 28 miles without killing all of them because they don't sweat out, except out of their nose. They don't herd well. They're not, they're not goats. Well, goats don't herd well either. They're not sheep. So the other option is Gadara, which is 15 miles away. Well, that's the same problem. Is I doubt that these guys ran 15 miles through rocky terrain in sandals, told the town and ran 15 miles back, and Jesus was still sitting there. And you still don't herd pigs that far. So that's just stuff that may not matter to you, but that creates some problems because Gerasene, is they think they found a city that was Gerasene, but it's not. It's actually just a different city. They're like, maybe this is one that just had a different name. It's like, well, you could do it with anything. But there's an idea that these people, they wondered how these people that were so pagan and so right up close to the Hebrew people that honored God, how could they be so close to such pagan people? And in their mind, there was this word called gerus in Hebrew, and it means to expel, to cast out, to drive out. It's the same word used for Joshua when he drives out. He gerus the people from the promised land. He drives them out. It's the same word for divorce. You expel them from a marriage covenant. Same word for getting expelled from school. It's gerus. You're cast out. And so because of that, the rabbis called the east side of the Sea of Galilee the dispelled ones, the gerus people, the Gerasenes. And so when it says Jesus went to and it's just opinion, I can't prove this. But it says Jesus went to Gerasenes. I think it's just saying he went to the land of the dispelled ones, because in their mind that put a theological place marker, and these are, in a sense, and the way they explained it, they knew it was not biologically true, but the way they explained it was that basically these were leftover people, scraps from when Joshua was supposed to cleanse the promised land fully, and they didn't. They ended up not killing everyone, or driving them out at least. They didn't finish the job, and God said, this is going to plague you forever because you didn't just finish the job. And so in their mind, they knew it wasn't true because there had been many conquests since then by the Persians and the Greeks, now the Romans. So in their mind, though, this was the leftover people from when Joshua forgot or failed to gerus the people. So Jesus goes to the land of the expelled ones. And what happens is on the way, there's a storm while he's on the boat, which I think is hilarious because every time they get in a boat in the text, apparently there's a storm. I'd stop getting in the boat if I were them. And he gets to there, and it says that immediately the man was there. And there's only one, if you go there, there's only one city that's close to the sea, and it's called a city called Susita, or Hippos in Greek. And so I think that's the city in it, which it'll make a little bit more sense in a second when you see who's there. Because Jesus gets off the boat, demon-possessed man comes, drives the demons out, puts them in pigs, drives them into the water, which we'll get into so much imagery we'll get into. But the thing is that at Hippos, there was a legion of Roman troops there, which was not super normal, but they had a legion of Roman troops there. And it was the 10th Legion. The 10th Legion had a symbol, and they had a mascot, which was a boar's head. They had a pig as their mascot. So it's so fun. Jesus is always making political jokes sometimes that we don't see. So Jesus gets off the boat, goes to Hippos, where the 10th Legion, which the 10th Legion was formed, this is so interesting to me, the 10th Legion was formed from the 7th Legion of Roman troops. The 7th Legion had retreated, they had ran in battle. So Caesar gathered them together. He broke them up into groups. There was 2,000 had died, so there were 3,000 remaining. He had got them into groups of about 10, made them cast lots, and whoever the lot fell on, the 9 of them beat the 10 to death. And the remaining troops were now, he said, he gave a not great speech, but he gave a very, heroic speech after they beat 300 of their comrades to death. He says, the 7th Legion is no more. You are now the 10th Legion, and you will never, ever run in battle ever again. It says the 7th Legion no longer exists. You are now the 10th Legion, where we get the name decimate. That's where they get that idea from. And they actually became a brutal fighting force. They became the Caesar's personal, bodyguard, like the Praetorium. They became the U.S. Navy SEAL elite fighting class. They were the top of, they were not just regular foot soldiers. They were the best technology, the best fighting, the biggest athletes, the biggest men. That was the 10th Legion. If you ask why on earth is there such an elite fighting force on the Sea of Galilee with nonviolent Jews on the west side. The reason is right over the hill behind them, the Susita Hippos, was the Zealots. That was Gamla, where the Zealot headquarters, that was their base. And the Zealots have been sending Romans home, their sons home in jars for 200 years up until this point. They cremated, but they send them home for 200 years. And that is just such a testimony to, you do not get rid of religious fanaticism easily. It just does not go away because they do not care to die. They don't care to die for their God, and they just keep killing and killing and killing. And I mean, the Roman soldiers had to walk in groups on the road because the Zealots would jump out of the bushes and shank them all to death, drag them to the bushes. And think ISIS, and not theologically, but think in the way that we win our kingdom by terrorizing God's enemies. That's how we win. And Jesus taught very different. Not Crusaders, that was more mass, but they were a fighting extremist group, the Zealots. So that just shows you how much the Romans respected in a have to way, the Zealot division of people that were right over the hill from Susita Hippos. But the fact that their image, their symbol, called can't remember the name of it, their standard was a boar's head, just proves to me even more that Jesus got off the boat and that he was right at Susita Hippos, which is, you could see it from the shore. It's not very far. It's like 1,500 feet up. That just tells me, and there's also a pretty cool thing there. There's a Roman soldier apparently accidentally stepped in the concrete while it was being poured there, and his sandal print left a mark at Susita Hippos. It's in the museum in Jerusalem now, but you can see on the sandal print the unique symbol for the 10th legion. It's pretty cool. It's like a boar's head on it, but they had it on his nails on his sandals. So apparently, I don't know if he did it on purpose or he accidentally stepped in the cement or what, but so that elite fight. So it's not great to have a legion of Roman soldiers in your area for the Jewish people, but to have the 10th legion, that brutal class of people, was not great. They were mostly preoccupied with the Zealots, though. So when it says Jesus crosses the other side, that's what he is walking into. He didn't go into the city, but that's how different they are theologically. It's worlds apart, but because they didn't have globalism and connected through technology and stuff, it was, you could be a few miles from someone and be completely worlds apart in worldview and theology. I love that God put them also on the front lines of the pagan world. He did not want his people to retreat. He wanted them to engage, not like the Zealots did, but he wanted them to engage. He wanted them to engage theologically. He wanted them to engage in discussion, talk about worldview, and talk about their faith and their religion. He wanted them to, in a sense, we would say, you want them to convert this people, but he wanted them to have an influence. That's why we wonder why the Israelites always get conquered. It's no surprise if you look at the map, because God put them in the middle of the world at their time, put them in the very middle, and then had Rome and Persia and Egypt and Greece all fight over the land that the Israelites were in, and Babylon, and the list goes on and on because God wanted them to have an influence on those people. So Jesus gets into the boat. Now that's the whole back. I just want you to know where he's going to. That's to be very important, because for Jesus to reveal the secret of the kingdom he's about to reveal to us, you have to know what world he's going to, because he's not going to say it straight up because he wants you to see it. He wants you to see it in the text. He wants you to see it in his actions. He's going to live the text. So he gets in the water, crosses the sea, but there's a storm, which should ring a lot of bells in your biblical understanding of your mind. When water to us doesn't mean a whole lot, but to them, and this is a very quick summary, but to the Jewish understanding, the Hebrew understanding at this time, is that water, the chaotic waters, was pure evil. It represented chaos. So that is the Genesis 1 worldview, is that there was, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and flat. Tohu vavohu. It was, formless and void, and the waters of the earth, the waters covered the earth. It was chaos. It was disorder. It was not evil in a sense, but it wasn't in order. And then the opposite of chaos is putting it in order. So God, tikkun olam, as we discussed, puts the chaos into order. So people said we're made the image of God. That must be our job too. We take chaos of the world and put it into order. That's if you haven't seen yet, hopefully the bell went off, and that's exactly what Jesus did. He went to this man who's living in absolute chaos, put it in order. And before he does it, what does he do? Just to make it abundantly clear to the disciples, the sea starts raging. He's asleep, which think Jonah, same exact thing. Jonah's asleep, but he's running from God. Jesus is asleep, but he's going towards the mission God has for him. But there's still a storm, which is a lot of applications there. He gets up and he rebukes the wind and the waves, and they are quiet. And the word for quiet Think not still. Yours probably says he said, "Be quiet," and they were still. But in Greek, it's they were quiet, like they were making. It's almost like the sea was yelling, and it made it quiet, which is a strange thing. And you should think straight out of the gate, Genesis 1 there, because God speaks, and the chaotic waters were put into order, and the earth was created. So that is why they see Jesus performing miracles, speaking to the chaotic waters, and they were like, "Who is this man?" Speaks to the waters, they're still, but the word, what is strange in that is he says he rebuked the wind and the waves. Rebuking is something you do to someone. You don't rebuke something, you rebuke someone. So, it's so fascinating. So he rebuked someone in that, which you got to see that to them, this idea had developed through the Bible, not just on their own, that the chaotic waters, and which is different, by the way, than living waters. Living waters are good. Living waters as a stream, it's a river going, it's water. Living water is water that goes to where it's going under its own power. So a river is living water because you don't have to help it and you don't collect it and stop it. It's going to its destination by itself, meaning it's good water to drink, which is why it's good living water. You don't drink water from the Sea of Galilee because it's stagnant. So to them, the ocean and the sea and lakes were chaotic water, and good water was living water. And I hope that makes sense now why what's funny to me is that the first century church, we kind of, sometimes people say, what should we do what the first century church did? Well, there's a document called the Didache from the first century church, like literally while the apostles were still alive. And the idea that you could be baptized in not a river was like only under very, very, very special circumstances, whether you're incapable of moving or whether you're in prison or like literally can't get there. And that's the only time you would ever not be baptized in a river or living flowing water, because they don't want you to be baptized in something representing hell, like the Sea of Galilee. That'd be very funny. To them, it's like you get baptized into what is called hell. You get baptized into living water because Jesus says, "I am the living water." So you get baptized and that's way before that. That's what Jesus and John the Baptist's baptism was. And then you also the idea of just carrying your sins away. It's and it's refreshing. It's not. It's just funny to me that we get baptized in what to them represented hell, but it's funny to me. So Jesus speaks to the wind and the waves, rebukes them, and it says that they are quiet. But like I said, it's something you do to people, not something. The reason for that is possibly from Zechariah 3. Let me find it. In Zechariah 3, there's a strange scene. Oh boy, did I mark it? I did. In Zechariah 3, there's this image of Satan being in the presence of God. And it says Zechariah 3:2, and the Lord said to Satan, "The Lord rebukes you, O Satan. The Lord who has chosen Jerusalem rebukes you. Is this not a brand I have plucked from the fire?" Referring to Jerusalem. And so there's that image of when Jesus rebukes, in their mind, what is an image of Satan. And you got to understand, they believe Satan lived in the water, which is hard for us to understand because to us, they were fishermen and they loved the water. That could not be any more untrue. They fished because they had to. But just look at what fish look like compared to what they see in sheep and, rams and goats. And it's like, but then you pull a sardine out of the water. You're like, what on earth is this thing? It looks evil. It looks crazy. It looks scary. It's to them, it was called the abyss. It was hell. So you got to see Jesus, import that image into Jesus walking on water. You got to see it's not just, oh, cool, we did a miracle, he's God. No, this is Jesus walking over the hell himself, showing that he has authority over who goes and who doesn't go to hell. It's like, that is a packed imagery. So I think that's the idea of Jesus rebuking Satan directly. There's also another layer of, to them, all the Canaanite worship on the east side of the Sea of Galilee that had get left over. They worshipped Baal. There was many Baals, but they worshipped a specific Baal that was the god of thunder and lightning. So Jesus says, let's go to the other side at night. He says it was evening came, so they went to the other side. While they're going, it starts thundering and lightning and storming. You got to be kidding me. I knew we shouldn't have done this. It's a terrible idea. We're going to the other side. We shouldn't be caught dead here. While we're on the way, Baal is trying to kill us because we're in his territory. We're on the sea. Jesus is sleeping. And they wake Jesus up just like Jonah, and he rebukes Satan himself. It says, no, you shut. And the Greek word there, by the way, it's a street word, not a swear word, but it's a street word. It's not our nice translations will say, and he said, be quiet. But the Greek word is shut up. It's a very aggressive word. So Jesus stands up and says, Satan, shut up. And it is quiet. And that's when they go, who on earth is this, that even the winds and the waves obey, meaning even Satan himself obeys him. Which now understand that he gets off the boat. And what the Greek implies is that this demon-possessed man set the world land speed record running to Jesus. He ran as fast as he possibly could to Jesus, and he screams at the top of his lungs, I know who you are. What do you have to do with me? Don't torment me. So I love that. They're probably like, you got to be kidding me. We come all the way over here and then meet what they probably thought was Satan himself on the shore of this man who's just yelling and out of his mind. And there's a lot to that too, as you can probably tell. So what happens is he says, I know who you are, Jesus, Son of the Most High God. And Jesus says, what is your name? He says Legion, which by now you should realize he says Legion. Legion is a group of Roman soldiers. And I wonder if there's any guards or any soldiers watching, or I doubt it, but just that idea of, and the disciples were probably chuckling because, this demon-possessed man is named Legion. Like, of course he is. Well, it's not his name, but the demons say that they are Legion. And Legion's, by the way, we'll get to that, but Legion's not a proper name. It's a noun. It's describing a group of Roman soldiers. It's not a name someone would have at all. So he cries out. Jesus goes over there, and he eventually casts out the demons. First he says, what is your name? He says Legion. And there's this idea, which I think is kind of being hinted at there, in pagan practice in their area. And this is what Jesus addresses in Matthew 6, where you would say the name of the gods over and over and over and over, trying to say it right. If you could say it right, if you could say it enough times, you would exert some power over the god. They would have to do what you ask if you just keep saying their name over and over. If you say it right, it was like kind of a mystery how you really pronounce their name. So you say it in a bunch of different ways, and you say it a bunch of different times, but then you exercise some authority over them. Jesus says in Matthew 6, when you pray, do not go on babbling like the pagans, for they think they'll be heard for their many words. So there's a Baal. It's like, don't do that. You're not heard for your many words. Pray to me like I'm a father, God says. Not like I'm a God that you need to exercise control over. I'm a father who wants to help you. I don't want to be like that. I don't want you to think of me like those gods. So he says, what is your name? Thinking he can, in a sense, exercise some power over Jesus. Jesus says, what is your name? It is Legion. And he casts the demons out, sends them into pigs, which you should see as the most, to the Hebrew mind, was the most unclean, disgusting, worthless animal, because that's what the pagans sacrificed to Baal and to all the other gods. And he sends them to the abyss. And it drives me nuts. I read one commentary that said, I'm not going to tell you which one because I want you to read it, but it says that Jesus even shows his mercy on the demons. It was like, wow. To me, that's not a feat of Jesus shows mercy on demons. And the point is, you got to see the imagery there. Just because Jesus didn't use the words like a Greek writer would have. He doesn't say the words, okay, demons, now you go to hell. This is what this represents. You're going to hell. No, he uses the very Hebrew understanding. If he takes the demons, puts them in an unclean animal so you can see what he's about to do, because if he just casted demons to hell without you seeing, like, well, what happened? But so you get the imagery. He puts them in an unclean animal and sends them to what Luke calls the abyss. He gets it. He nails it. He doesn't let you allude to it. He says he sends them to the abyss. So Jesus takes the demons, puts them in the pig, sends them to hell early, I think is what you're supposed to get from that. So no, Jesus doesn't have mercy on demons. And I even saw like, Jesus, listen to their requests. Like, no, he says, oh, you don't want to go to hell? Okay, you're going to hell early. It's not, Jesus isn't having mercy on demons here. So he sends them to the pigs, which remember the Roman cohort on the hill was the 10th Legion, the pigs. First is notice their response to the pigs dying. Notice the difference in the Hellenist response, and notice the difference in what would be the Hebrew understanding. Also notice how they would have, I want you first to just realize, I should have covered this already, just notice what this person is. They're in the tombs, so to the Greek mind, to the Greek world, this man is worthless. He has no beauty, he can't provide anything, he can't even speak correctly. They had to bind him up because he's so violent and aggressive. He's the bottom of the barrel in the Hellenist world. I keep saying Greek, but it's the Roman world, the Hellenist Greek worldview. He was the bottom of the barrel. He was absolutely worthless. Jesus shows up. They're Jewish. So you're probably thinking, no, he was among the tombs, so he's unclean. He was cutting himself, so he has open sores. He's unclean. He's unclothed, which was what the Greeks liked, but that was an abomination to the Jews. It was an honor. To be immodest in Judaism was to dishonor God, because you're not treating the image of God like it's a sacred. The image of God is sacred to you. And it's so cool to me that if you want to convince your 12-year-old boy, even taking a shower in Hebrew thought was an act of worship, because you're cleansing and taking care of the image of God that he's given you. I love that. So I should have heard that when I was 13. But No, I love that. And so to them, he is also the bottom of the barrel. They would have thought he's still Tselem in the image of God. But understand too, he's unclean and impure, and he's filled with the presence of Satan himself. So this is about as useless and worthless, and I say that loosely, of a man that you could possibly have. And he's filled with demons. And he comes to Jesus, and Jesus goes to him because he hears him cry out. That's what it says. And I don't know, I can't prove this, but it's like we think Jesus was just, in the spirit. There's a man crying out. I think that this man was just screaming at the top of his lungs, and Jesus heard him across the Sea of Galilee. Because if you go over there, it's about, and I wouldn't say our parking lot's a little bit bigger, but it's not far, and sound travels across water pretty well. I think he just heard this man crying out, and Jesus said, in who he is, I have to go find this man and deliver him. And if you see cry out, it's the same word used for Israel in slavery. Israel cried out to God, and God came and delivered them, Exodus, through the waters. It's like all the imagery there of what's going on. This is an Exodus for this man. So this man's about as useless and worthless as it gets. So the significance of the lesion, I think first it's the significance of the whole passage we need to understand. It's not just that Jesus did this stuff, now he's God, that's awesome. He's unveiling the secret of the kingdom to them. So what you've got to see is he goes there with opposition to Satan himself in their mind. Satan himself is trying to oppose him from going over to the Decapolis. He gets there, and what does the man say? He says they begged him not to make him depart from the country or from the region. Make sure I got it right, because I want to make sure or maybe there's a Mark count and a Matthew account. But one of them says he begged him not to make him depart from the territory, from the area. I wonder why a demon would want to be in that occupation, in that territory. I think the image you're supposed to see is Satan has control over this Decapolis. I mean, of course, we know that. But what you got to see is he says, I'm legion, is what you got to ask is, were these demons a legion? No, they weren't Roman soldiers. So Jesus isn't fooled for a second. He says, you go to hell. And that's what you got to realize is what these demons are trying to do is get Jesus to think what they've been getting the Jews to think, that, oh, this is all just the Romans, it's the Romans occupying, it's the Romans in control, the Romans are the enemy, if you can just keep fighting the Romans like the Zealots, if you can just defeat the Romans, then God's peace will come. And what Jesus is showing, he's not fooled for a second. He says, oh, we're just the Romans, we're legion, we're the enemy. He says, no, you're Satan, you go to hell, where demons belong. So he's taking this veil away of like, don't you get, this isn't about what Paul later called, this isn't a struggle against flesh and blood. This isn't a struggle against your neighbor or your enemy. This isn't a struggle against them. And what Paul is going to work out theology. And this is a struggle against the power behind the throne. This is a struggle against Satan himself. And Jesus shows that by, I think what happens is the demons just say, oh, we're Roman, we're legion, we're the enemy. Jesus didn't even question it. He says, not fooled, sends him to hell. This guy's in his right mind. And the disciples are like, I think that may have been a light switch for them, realizing, oh, it's not, I hope it is, but it's not the Romans. It's this guy was the bottom of the barrel, and still, when he was released and delivered from the power of Satan himself, that he's in his right mind and worshiping Jesus, and then he goes back to the Decapolis, telling everyone what God's done for him. So what you got to see in this is that Jesus is facing opposition from Satan the whole time, and then delivers this Roman man from the power of Satan, just to show this isn't about the Roman. He's not going to say that because that's not a good teacher if you just say it, because you can say it for years and never get it. But when you see Jesus cast out demons from a Roman man, you get it. It's not about the Romans. It's not about who's across the sea. Let's look at a passage real quick. Like I always say, I think Jesus is always using a passage from the text. Here's one, Psalm 107. Pretty much the whole psalm, but I'll go through it and string some of it together so you can see. It says, some wandered in desert. So by the way, one way Jesus uses the text is, I don't think he's not quoting it, but he is, it's called an acted parable. He's living it, and he's acting it out, showing you what this text looks like, or showing you what this text is so you go back to it and remember the heart of God. So it says, some wandered in desert wastes, finding no way to a city to dwell in. Hungry and thirsty, their soul fainted within them. They cried to God. They cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. Some sat in darkness and in the shadow of death, prisoners in afflictions and in irons, for they had rebelled against the words of God. They fell down with none to help. They cried to the Lord in their trouble. He delivered them from their distress. He brought them out of darkness and out of the shadow of death and burst their bonds apart. Let them thank the Lord for his steadfast love. Some went, and in verse 23, some went down to the sea in ships, doing business on the great waters. They saw the deeds of the Lord, for his wondrous works in the deep. For he commanded and raised the stormy wind, which lifted up the waves of the sea. They mounted up to heaven, then they went down to the depths. Their courage melted away in their evil plight. They reeled against and staggered like drunken men, and they were at their wits' end. They cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he delivered them from their distress. He made the storm be still, and the waves of the sea were hushed. Then they were glad that the waters were quiet, and he brought them to their desired haven. Let them thank the Lord for his steadfast love. So I think what you have to see in that is this is a reverse acted parable of Jesus. Whereas in the psalm, they deliver someone from their distress, and then there's another image of someone on a boat rage against the raging sea, and God, it says, the Lord silenced the sea and made it be quiet. It hushed the sea. And I think that's Jesus. They would have thought that psalm immediately. That's why they said, who on earth is this? Because I know Psalm 107, and in Psalm 107, it's God who hushes the sea. And the opposite, I love that, breaking their bonds apart and breaking the irons off. I think that's very symbolic of the demon-possessed man, because it says they tried to bound him, and all his shackles and his chains around his ankles were broken. They tried to bind him, they couldn't. Another one is Isaiah 65. Where is that? Isaiah 65, I think, is the more clear one. I think that first one, if anything, was just very clearly showing them who has authority over the raging waters. But Isaiah 65, and this one's, you got to get this is such an example of you got to get the punch of the chapter in Isaiah in order to get the teaching of Jesus. It says 65:1, I'll start from the top. It says, and I'll skip around. It says, I was ready to be sought by those who did not ask for me. I was ready to be found by those who did not seek me. I said, here I am, to a nation that was not called by my name. A people who provoke me to my face continually, sacrificing in gardens, who sit in tombs and spend the night in hidden places, who eat the flesh of pigs, who say, keep to yourself, do not come near me, for I am too holy for you. Thus says the Lord, as new wine, this is verse 8, thus says the Lord, as the new wine is found in the cluster of grapes, and they say, do not destroy it, for there's a blessing in it. So I will do for my servant's sake and not destroy them all. So what he's saying, I think what he's doing by acting out this is the point is, there's this image of someone who's among the tombs, who's eating pig's flesh, the flesh of pigs, who's spending the night in secret hidden tomb places. And what Jesus said, what God says in Isaiah is that the same way that people say, no, don't throw away those grapes. There's good wine in those. There's a blessing in those. Even if they're ugly, if the grapes they look bad, you can still crush them up and make wine. Don't throw them away. There's good wine in those. That's what he's saying about this man, is everyone's given up on him. From the Greek worldview, from the Jewish worldview, everyone's given up on him. But Jesus is saying, no, there's still good wine in him. He's still a grape. He's still a grape from the cluster. There's good wine, and go get it. Don't give up on him. I love that Jesus acts that out. He shows how to live that, how to have the heart of God and go do that. Okay, real quick, there's two really interesting things I think you'll like. One is this area, Susita, was later on, what I love is he tells this man, the man tries to get in the boat with him, and it says Jesus, it's strong in Greek, it says Jesus forbade him. He said, no, do not get in the boat. Go tell everyone what the Lord's done for you. So he does. It says he went throughout, I think Mark says he went through all the Decapolis, whether you take that at face value, went throughout all the Decapolis sharing what God's done for him. Jesus comes back to this region later on the way to Jerusalem, and a bunch of believers meet him. I was like, where do they come from? All these believers from this Decapolis region meet him. Much later on, talking about hundreds of years later, this area became fully Christian. They had taken their temples down. They took the temples, turned them into churches. This Susita right across the Sea of Galilee became Christian through and through. And I love that maybe those people, hundreds of years later, were still being influenced by the testimony of this one man. That Jesus doesn't go to seminary. He doesn't have expert theological training. He just said, go tell people what God did for you. And then all these people believe. Interestingly, maybe you've heard of the Nicene Creed. The Nicene Creed, they say it in Roman Catholic churches all the time. It's a basic, you look it up, it's really cool, but it's just a very deep but simple theological statement about who Jesus is, who God is. The co-author of one of the co-authors of the Nicene Creed was the Bishop of Susita. Which is, I mean, I don't know if it's true. At least it's just interpretation. It's just, maybe just something to encourage you. Maybe the one story of this one man, hundreds of years later, was used to turn this city Christian, and then years later was used. The Bishop of Susita later was used to write the Nicene Creed, which is still said in churches to this day about who Jesus is and who he is to humanity and who he is in his nature. All because of this one man's story. This is still thousands of years later being influenced by this guy. And you don't even get his name. I love that. I think that's so fascinating. One more quick thing is if you look at the text, and this is also interpretive, I can't prove it obviously, which is a shame, but it says they got into the boat and they crossed the sea and they were scared and Jesus calmed the waves. And when they got to the other side, it says Jesus got off. And Jesus approached the man, or he approached him. Jesus interacted with them. They ran off. They told people they came back. They said, hey, you get out of here. And Jesus says, Jesus said, okay, gets back on the boat. Jesus forbade him, and then they left. But what's fascinating is it says they got on, and then Jesus did, and then Jesus did, and then Jesus did, and then Jesus got back on, and then they left. So, which is, it's just like, in my mind, what I picture at least is that they went to the other side, prevented by Satan almost. They land on shore and they're like, we're not stepping foot on this land because we know what's over there. We're not getting out of this stinking boat. And Jesus says, fine. He gets out. He casts out demons, sends them to the pigs, sends them to hell, gets back on the boat, and they were scared out of their mind probably. And I love that. Just such a great image for if you want to follow Jesus, if you want to do the work of Jesus, you have to get out of the boat. You have to get out. And it may be terrifying. The thing is, it's not like they got out of the boat, they were scared. No, they got out of the boat. They probably didn't get out of the boat because they saw Satan himself running at them. They're like, you gotta be kidding me. It's bedtime and we sailed across the Sea of Galilee, almost died just to meet Satan face to face on the shore. But if you want to follow the rabbi, if you want to follow Jesus, you have to get out of the boat and be brave or whatever you want to say. So I just love that imagery of maybe they didn't get out of the boat. There's another story later where a man doesn't get in the boat. Jesus says, hey, come. He says, can I follow you, Jesus? Jesus says, I don't think you have what it takes. And the man doesn't get in the boat with Jesus. And he misses out on so much. But I love that. If you want to follow Jesus, you have to get out of the boat. One thing I completely forgot from, the lesson's over. One thing I completely forgot from earlier was just further adding to the case that this is Susita and not any of those other cities, because this may be the only time you ever hear that, is because the word gerus is expel. And maybe I already said this, I can't remember. But Jesus gets out and they try to expel Jesus. He says, get out of here, Jesus. Jesus says, expel the demons. Did I already say this? No. Oh, he gerus. He says, no, you get out of here, demons. He expels the demons. And then the people come and they expel Jesus. So Jesus goes to the land of the expelled ones, Gerasenes. And it's a battle of who's going to expel who. And I just love that. That is the image of the kingdom. That's what we're going to get into for what the kingdom looks like. Because Jesus is about to train up disciples to bring the kingdom. He's going to give them authority over demons here in a chapter or two, and they're going to go out and they're going to expel. And that's just a beautiful image for the kingdom. As you go over there, the power of darkness, the kingdom of darkness, Paul calls it, it's going to try to push you back, and your job is to drive back the darkness and bring the kingdom of heaven, not by force like the zealots, but by caring for the marginalized, by caring for the bottom of the barrel of a human, and believing there's still good wine left in the grapes like Jesus would. Okay, we'll end it there. If you have any questions, I'd love to stick around and answer them.
Very good. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Very interesting.
Yeah, it's a deep
how you connect all that.
So much there.
Yeah.
All right. I'll take any questions about anything. We got nowhere to be, so I'll answer anything you want.
My understanding of the story was more along the lines of like they were so afraid of him they wouldn't even run away without his permission.
Yeah.
And it was mercy to let them go into
Yeah.
the pigs and run home essentially.
Yeah. And it's like, if you don't have that image of the water being hell, it's like Jesus had mercy on them. It's like, I think they said, let us go. Are you here? Matthew says, are you here to torment us before the time, which is very kind of what we talked about with Jesus and John the Baptist, their Pharisee idea of eschatology. There's a time where all of Satan and his helpers will be defeated and killed. And he says, are you here to do this before that? And Jesus says, I'll let my actions speak. And so he sends him to hell. It's like, I am. I have no problem theologically with demons going to hell early. It doesn't bother me a whole lot. But yeah. All right. Well, if there's no more questions, we'll see y'all. I'm very excited about next week. Oh my goodness. Reading commentaries for next week, I was getting so frustrated earlier because it's like this woman and the woman at the well are like two people who are probably just sitting in heaven. Just like, you got to be kidding me. These people are just destroying my reputation. They think I was just terrible. I mean, this woman in commentaries I read this week was described as she had faith, but she did it all wrong. And she was misguided and misdirected. And she had no idea what she was talking about. And she grabbed Jesus' hem by some superstition. I cannot wait to get into that and explain what's going on there. Because I think it ties into this story. Because, I mean, the fact that Jesus goes back, gets off the boat, someone could, hey, my daughter's dying. It's like, I wonder if that has something to do with that being a synagogue ruler. So we'll get into that next week. But glad to have y'all. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Stay well.
You too.